I never expected to be caught off guard in a place that smelled of motor oil and old leather. The garage was quiet except for the hum of a single overhead fan and the faint metallic echo of tools shifting somewhere in the back. I was just trying to get my bike tuned up before my next city commute. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth remembering. And yet, the moment she walked in, everything shifted. She had this way of moving that made the space feel smaller, though it was wide and open. Confident, but not loud, like someone who didn't need to announce herself to own a room. I noticed the way her boots scuffed lightly over the concrete floor, the slight crease in the sleeve of her blazer that somehow suggested both precision and ease. And her eyes, God, her eyes weren't the kind you just look at. They made you pause. I shuffled over, trying to keep my hands busy with my phone, anything to avoid staring too long. She leaned against the counter, flipping through a service checklist with a faint smirk, like she was amused by something I hadn't yet seen. And maybe that's what did it. I felt the tiniest spark, a pull I couldn't name, and immediately, I scolded myself. "Is this the last check you wanted?" she asked without looking up, voice calm but edged with something sharp, something that suggested she could tell if I was lying. I fumbled a little, nodding too quickly. My throat had gone dry. "Yeah, that's it, I guess." Her head snapped up then, eyes locking with mine, and the world suddenly made a horrible, delicious kind of sense. There was a beat, a silence too long for normal conversation, and she smiled, just a twitch of one side of her lips, but it was enough to unbalance me completely. "You're thinking it too," she said, almost in passing, and I swear the words pressed into my chest before I even registered them. I blinked, and she tilted her head slightly, like she'd caught me in a thought I wasn't supposed to have. And maybe I hadn't even meant to have it. I hadn't intended to notice the way her hair caught the fluorescent light, the faint perfume that smelled faintly of rain and something warmer beneath it. I hadn't intended to care about the way her fingers hovered over the clipboard, brushing it without purpose. But I did. I cared. She turned her gaze back to the papers in front of her, leaving me suspended in the quiet space between acknowledgement and embarrassment. My pulse wouldn't settle. My brain kept repeating the words she had spoken, over and over, like some secret I wasn't allowed to understand but couldn't stop thinking about. I left that garage later with my bike running smoother than ever, but nothing about the ride mattered. I kept replaying her glance, that slight twitch of a smile, and the strange intimacy of her observation. And somehow, without any names or promises exchanged, I knew I'd be back, not just for the bike. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she had looked at me, and how for just a moment, I felt like she could see everything I was trying not to show. A week later, I found myself back at the garage. I told myself it was just to check the brakes again. Technically, I had nothing urgent to fix. But the moment I pushed open the door, that same pulse of electricity hit me. She was there, crouched by a motorcycle that looked way too expensive to be in someone else's hands. Her blazer rolled up at the elbows, sleeves just brushing the curve of her forearm. "Back again," she said without looking up. The words were casual, but her tone carried the tiniest edge of amusement, like she was measuring whether I'd say the wrong thing. I noticed a squeak. I muttered, fumbling with my keys. I tried to keep my voice steady, but she caught the hesitation immediately. She always did. I stayed nearby, half helping, half just observing. She worked with precision, but there were small tells I noticed this time. The way her fingers lingered on the wrench too long, the faint crease between her brows, the subtle slump in her shoulders. She was tired, more tired than she let anyone see. And when she finally laughed at a joke one of the mechanics made, it wasn't full laughter. It was careful, measured, almost apologetic. I found myself watching her hands more than anything. The delicate way she held the tools, the occasional brush against her hair, as if she didn't want anyone to notice, the slight tremor when she tightened a bolt just right. I didn't know why I cared so much. "You're awfully quiet today," she said at one point, glancing up from the engine. Her eyes caught mine for a split second before flicking away again. The pause felt longer than it should have. "Just taking it all in," I said, knowing full well how pathetic that sounded. She didn't respond, only tilted her head, her lips pressed into that almost smile that always felt like a warning and a promise all at once. There was a vulnerability in her posture, subtle but there, and for a brief moment, I wondered if she wanted someone to notice it, or if noticing it would be crossing some invisible line. I handed her a rag when she wiped her hands, and our fingers brushed. Just a brush, but it lingered in my memory long after. She looked at me then, really looked, for a moment that felt stretched thin over eternity, and her expression faltered, just a hint of exhaustion, of doubt. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. I let the silence do the work, let it stretch between us like a fragile thread humming with possibility. And when she turned back to the bike, adjusting a bolt, I caught the soft exhale she hadn't realized she'd let out, the one that whispered she might be letting her guard down, just a little. It was quiet again. The fan above hummed. The metallic echo of tools shifted somewhere in the back. And yet, in that stillness, I felt every heartbeat between us, every unspoken thought, every careful hesitation. I left that afternoon with my bike humming smoothly beneath me, but my mind was still pinned to her. Her small gestures, her tired laugh, the subtle vulnerability she didn't admit. And when she glanced up as I pushed the door open to leave, our eyes met, held, and lingered. That small, shared moment of awareness, charged, impossible, forbidden, stuck with me long after I had gone. The storm caught me off guard. I hadn't realized how dark it had gotten until the rain started hammering against the garage's skylight, the rhythm loud enough to make the quiet inside feel like a secret. She was there, still crouched over a disassembled engine, a single lamp casting a soft glow on her hair and shoulders. The smell of rain mixed with motor oil, and for some reason, it felt intimate in a way the bright daylight never could. I handed her a small flashlight, and our hands touched briefly. Just a touch, but long enough for her fingers to stiffen, for a tiny shiver to run down my spine. We exchanged a glance, and I caught it. Her hesitation, the almost smile that hinted she was aware of the thread of tension between us. I didn't think anyone would still be here, I said, trying for casual, failing. I work late sometimes, she replied, voice calm. But the way she held the wrench a little too tightly betrayed a flicker of something she wasn't saying. The silence stretched, broken only by the rain outside. I wanted to say something, something honest, dangerous, meaningful, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I leaned slightly closer, just enough to catch the faint scent of her perfume. She shifted, just a fraction, close enough to notice, but far enough to keep the line of propriety intact. And then, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it quickly, a flash of annoyance crossing her face, and I saw a name I didn't recognize. I caught myself tensing. A moment of clarity hit me. This was life, with all its interruptions, all its practical boundaries, reminding me that we weren't supposed to exist in this small, charged bubble. I forced myself to step back, pretending to check a tool on the workbench. Every part of me screamed to close the distance again, to say what I shouldn't, to let the storm outside justify what couldn't happen inside. She glanced up at me once more, eyes sharp and guarded, yet softer than usual. For a fraction of a second, it felt like she was about to say something. Maybe a truth, maybe a tease, but then she shook her head subtly, as if she had reminded herself of the lines we weren't supposed to cross. I caught the quiet exhale she didn't realize she had let out, the one that almost confessed more than it should. My pulse accelerated, my mind juggling the weight of what I wanted against what was right. I could have reached out, could have bridged the gap, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I picked up a wrench, letting my fingers brush hers again by accident. Or so I pretended, and she tensed, then smoothed her expression. Another near moment passed, suspended in the space between intention and restraint. And as the rain continued to drum against the skylight, I realized that sometimes the things left unspoken held more weight than anything we dared to say. I left that night with my heart heavier than it should have been, remembering her gaze, her almost smile, and the fragile tension of a closeness that existed only in the pause between what was allowed and what we secretly wanted. We were sitting on opposite sides of the small break room, a single mug of lukewarm coffee between us. The hum of the fluorescent light above was louder than usual, filling the silence that had stretched too long to be comfortable. I kept glancing at her, trying to read what she wasn't saying, while she stared out the window at the late afternoon sky, gray and heavy, as if it mirrored the weight between us. Finally, she spoke, voice low, almost reluctant. "Do you ever wonder what this is?" I froze, the question cutting sharper than I expected. I had spent weeks trying to measure every glance, every brush of a hand, every pause, and here it was, out in the open, jagged and unpolished. I don't know," I admitted, though my voice sounded smaller than I felt. She didn't look at me. Her fingers wrapped around the mug, knuckles white, and I noticed how tense her shoulders were. The room felt smaller somehow, as if the walls themselves were pressing us closer, forcing honesty. I mean, are we just pretending? Or is this something we shouldn't even be thinking about? I wanted to say everything. I wanted to lean across the table, touch her hand, tell her exactly what I'd been thinking every time our eyes met. But instead, I swallowed the words. I let the silence stretch, letting it carry the weight of all the unspoken things. She turned then, slowly, and our eyes met. There was no spark, no flirtation, not yet. Just something raw, unfiltered. Fear, maybe. Confusion. And beneath it, the tiniest thread of longing neither of us would name. I don't want to ruin whatever this is," she said, voice breaking slightly, though she tried to mask it with calm. "But I can't act like it's nothing anymore." I didn't answer immediately. I wanted to, but the truth of it made my chest tighten. Every careful rule I'd set for myself felt useless. The quiet between us wasn't empty. It was full of everything we hadn't dared to admit. "I hate that I notice you," she continued, whispering almost to herself. "And I hate that I can't stop noticing." Her confession hung in the air like smoke. I felt it settle over me, thick and suffocating. I wanted to reach out, but even moving seemed dangerous, like the slightest motion could shatter the fragile balance. We just sat there, two people caught between desire and reason, letting the silence speak louder than any touch ever could. I noticed the way her lips parted slightly, the way her eyes lingered on me a fraction longer than necessary. And then she said it, quietly, devastatingly. "I don't know if I can be like this with you anymore." The words didn't land with anger. They landed like a weight I couldn't shift, a truth I had been trying to avoid. And in that silence that followed, I realized something terrifying and thrilling at once. I couldn't stop thinking about her, even if she vanished from my life the next second. I didn't expect her to open up. Not like this. The garage was empty, late afternoon lights spilling through the high windows, dust motes floating lazily in the quiet. She was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, staring at a faded photograph someone had left on the workbench. I noticed her hands tremble slightly as she held it, like she was afraid to let it go. "That's my sister," she said softly, almost to herself. "We weren't close, not really. But after everything, I just couldn't stay angry." Her voice cracked in that way that made me stop breathing for a moment. I hadn't expected tenderness here, or vulnerability, not from someone so carefully composed. I hesitated, unsure if I should speak, but I knew that silence now would feel like betrayal. I get it," I said. "I've lost someone too. A friend, years ago. I still think about them, even when I shouldn't." My words sounded awkward, but it was all I had. Her eyes flicked to mine, wide, searching. "You do?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. There was a pause, heavy with unsaid things, and suddenly, the air between us felt different, thicker, charged. She set the photo down and sighed, a long, weary sound. "I didn't mean to dump this on you. I haven't talked about her in years. Not really." "You're not dumping," I said quickly. It matters that you're saying it now." For a moment, we just stood there, each of us awkwardly close to saying more, but neither willing to cross a line we didn't yet understand. I noticed her fingers tapping lightly on the counter, her eyes tracing patterns in the dust, like she was both grounding herself and testing me at the same time. "I hate that it still hurts," she admitted, voice almost breaking. "That I can feel it all, even now." She swallowed hard, blinking as if trying to hold herself together. I wanted to tell her that pain didn't make her weak, that it made her human, that it made her even more impossible to forget. But instead, I just stood there, letting her words settle into the quiet between us. And then, almost without thinking, I reached out, letting my fingers brush hers as if by accident. She froze for a fraction of a second, and the look she gave me, vulnerable, startled, fragile, was enough to make my chest ache. "Don't," she whispered, a breathy sound, but it wasn't a warning. It was softer, quieter, trembling with the weight of everything she hadn't allowed herself to feel. The moment lingered, unspoken and impossible, like a tiny earthquake that rearranged the landscape of our cautious distance. I didn't pull back. Neither did she. And for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to our proximity, our shared vulnerability, and the tiny, seismic truth we had just let slip into the open. The garage was nearly empty that evening. Only the distant hum of the city beyond the open doors and the faint smell of motor oil lingering. She was bent over a stack of service invoices, the corners of her blazer slightly frayed, sleeves rolled up like she'd been working all day. I stood a few feet away, pretending to organize tools, but really just watching her move, noticing the familiar tension in her shoulders that seemed to soften whenever our eyes met. She looked up then, and our gazes collided. No words at first, just that heavy, fragile silence that had grown between us over weeks of glances, near confessions, and moments we'd almost let slip into something forbidden. She started, paused, then shook her head, a small, tired smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "It's ridiculous, isn't it? How complicated this feels." I exhaled slowly, letting the air carry some of the tension I'd been holding. "Not ridiculous," I said quietly. "I think it's just real. And real isn't simple." Her eyes softened, and for the first time in days, maybe weeks, I saw the wall between us drop slightly. She shifted closer, carrying a rag in her hand, and for the first time, it felt like we were in the same world, not just passing ships brushing by in silence. I reached out without thinking, letting my hand hover near hers. She didn't pull away. Instead, she let her fingers brush mine, tentative, testing. A small, deliberate gesture, yet the weight of it was immense. My chest tightened, not with desire alone, but with the relief of finally existing in the same space, fully acknowledged, fully present. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The world outside could have burned, and it wouldn't have mattered. The quiet between us was enough, full of understanding, of everything we had felt but hadn't named. She leaned her forehead against the back of my hand, just for a second, grounding herself, and me, against the storm of emotion we'd been tiptoeing around. That small touch, simple and human, sealed something that words never could. I realized then that what had been impossible had become inevitable, not because of grand declarations or dramatic gestures, but because of the weeks of shared silences, subtle glances, and moments that mattered more than we'd admitted. We stayed like that for a long time, neither moving nor speaking, letting the calm settle over us. I could feel the pulse of her breath against my skin, the faint warmth of her hand in mine, and the fragile certainty that we were no longer just two people skirting the edges of something unspoken. When she finally pulled back, just slightly, her eyes caught mine with a quiet honesty. There was no confession, no label, just the understanding that we had crossed the line from tension into connection, gently, cautiously, and irrevocably. And as I packed up my tools to leave, I felt that soft, seismic certainty in my chest, knowing that this, the quiet, the touch, the unspoken acknowledgement, was enough. Enough to carry us forward, one careful step at a time. It's strange, looking back now, how small moments can reshape everything. The garage, the late afternoons, the hum of tools, the stormy nights. They're all etched in my memory like little pieces of a map I didn't know I was following. And through it all, she was there, not just as someone I noticed, but as someone who made noticing matter. I think what changed most wasn't the gestures, the stolen glances, or even the brief touches. It was the permission we gave ourselves, to feel, to pause, to simply exist in each other's presence without pretending it was ordinary. She became less guarded, not by force, but by the quiet insistence of honesty. And I learned that connection isn't always loud or dramatic. It can be quiet, patient, and immeasurably profound. Sometimes I still catch myself remembering the way her fingers brushed mine when she leaned over a bolt, or how her laugh, even the careful, restrained one, could make the air feel warmer. Those small things linger longer than I expected, carrying weight I didn't realize I was ready to bear. She taught me that love doesn't always need a declaration to be real. It can live in shared silence, in the patience of waiting, in understanding the nuances of someone else's heart without demanding anything in return. And I taught myself that some risks, like leaning into something impossible or noticing too much, can also lead to the most human rewards. The truth is, we're not perfect. We're messy, cautious, and stubborn, but we're present. And in the end, that presence, quiet, unassuming, and persistent, felt like a kind of triumph. I still visit the garage sometimes, though now it's not just about the bike. It's about the conversation, the shared space, the unspoken acknowledgement that we've been through something rare and delicate together. And every time I see her, I notice things I hadn't before. The faint laugh lines at the corners of her eyes, the subtle way she tilts her head when she's thinking, the warmth in her voice that never needs to reach for theatrics. Love, I've learned, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it lingers in the small, quiet acts of noticing, and in allowing someone else to notice you back. And maybe that's what makes it unforgettable. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?